All right, welcome to the deep dive. You know how sometimes you see those huge football transfer headlines, the staggering amounts, players jetting off, and it all seems a bit, well, mysterious.
It really does, yeah. You see the signing, the shirt photo, but underneath all that, it's actually a pretty dense, sometimes surprisingly strict set of rules making it happen.
Exactly. And that hidden world, that's what we're diving into today. We've got the official FIFA regulations on the status and transfer players. This is the February 2024 version.
Ugh.
It's hefty.
Over 150 pages, yeah.
So our mission, cut through it, find the bits that really matter, maybe some surprising rules you didn't know about, and just sort of figure out what it all means for the game you follow.
Okay, good plan. Let's start right at the foundations then. Who and what do these rules even cover? Article 2 gives us the big split, professional versus amateur.
Right. What's the difference there?
It boils down to two things, really. Does the player have a written contract with a club? And crucially, are they getting paid more than just, their basic expenses for playing? If it's yes to both, they're a professional.
Got it. Written deal, actual wages beyond just travel costs.
Yeah.
Pro. Simple enough. And these rules, they're not just suggestions, are they?
Oh, not at all. Article 1 makes that super clear. They're global, binding on FIFA, all the associations, everyone. They directly govern international transfers moving between countries.
Okay.
But they also tell national associations what they have to put in their own domestic rules. Things
Yeah.
like basic registration stuff, the idea of a protected period in a contract, and this key concept of contractual stability.
Contractual stability. Sounds important.
It's kind of the cornerstone. Article 13 says it plainly. Contracts must be respected. Everything about, breaking contracts or how long they last builds from there.
Okay, so we know who's covered. Now let's get into the mechanics. How do players actually move under these rules? Registration seems key.
Right. Every single player, pro or amateur, has to be registered with an association to play organized football. It's all electronic now, and each player gets a unique FIFA ID.
Like a football passport.
Exactly. And interestingly, Article 5 points out even players on trial for, say, a friendly match need this ID, though the friendly itself might be exempt during the trial.
Huh. So that ID follows them everywhere. And registration.
Hmm.
You can't just do that anytime, right? There are windows.
Precisely. Article 6 lays it out. Only 2 main periods per year, usually. A longer one, maybe 8 to 12 weeks, typically in the
It's
off-season.
under window, usually.
Yeah, and then a shorter one, 4 to 8 weeks, mid-season. The associations have to set these dates and publish them way in advance. Annex 3 says they have to be in the TMS system 12 months ahead.
Annex. What's that? Like an extra bit?
Yeah, think of the annexes as appendices with more detailed rules or procedures. Annex 3 is all about the TMS, the transfer matching system. They're part of the main regulations.
Gotcha. So fixed windows. But surely there are exceptions. Life happens. Contracts end unexpectedly.
Oh, definitely. Article 6, paragraph 3 lists them. A pro can register outside a window if, say, their contract was terminated with just cause by the player. Maybe the club breached it.
Like not getting paid. We'll come back to that, I bet.
Exactly. Or if the contract was ended without just cause by the club. Also, if it just expired or was mutually terminated before the window shut. Plus, there are specific rules now for female players returning from maternity leave or covering for someone on leave, and those temporary COVID rules FIFA brought in.
So you're not totally stuck if something goes wrong with your contract.
Right. FIFA looks at sporting integrity, too, making sure it's fair.
Now, moving between countries. The ITC, International Transfer Certificate.
Yep, that's the magic document, Article 9. The player's old association has to issue it. And crucially, it must be free of charge and without any conditions attached.
So they can't hold it up demanding extra stuff.
Nope. And they've got a deadline just 7 days to respond to the request. If they don't, the new association can provisionally register the player anyway.
Keeps things moving. And
Yeah.
managing all this globally. That's the TMS you mentioned.
Yes, the transfer matching system. Article 3 of Annex 3 makes it mandatory for international transfers of pros, and even amateurs in 11 aside. It's web-based, meant for transparency.
Yeah.
Both clubs, both associations, they have to log in and match the details.
Right, okay. Let's talk loans then. Super common way for players to move temporarily. Article 10.
Yeah, loans are covered specifically. Needs a written agreement, max duration 1 year. Usually, the player's contract with their home club is just suspended during the loan. But here's where things got really interesting recently with new limits.
Ah, the loan caps. I've heard about these.
Exactly. Article 10, paragraph 6. Kicked in properly July 1st, 2024. A club can now only have a maximum of 6 professionals loaned out at any one time. and 6 professionals loaned in.
6 in, 6 out. That's it. So no more stockpiling dozens of players on loan.
Pretty much stops that, yeah. And there's another layer, too, in paragraph 8. A club can only loan a max of 3 players to any single other club. And they can only take a max of 3 players in from any single other club.
Whoa. Okay, so you can't just have one main feeder club you send everyone to or one parent club you get everyone from. That changes things for clubs with those big loan networks.
It absolutely does. Forces clubs to spread their loans out or maybe rethink squad building altogether. It's aimed at preventing, talent hoarding or over-reliance.
Makes sense.
Mm.
Are there exceptions to the main 6 in, 6 out rule?
There are, but only for loans out. It doesn't count towards the 6-out limit if the player's under 21. Well, before the end of the season, they turn 21, and they're a club-trained player at the club loaning them out.
Interesting. Age and club training status matter. Okay, one more movement thing before we get into contract issues. Bridge transfers, Article 5 bis. Sounds a bit dodgy.
It is dodgy, and it's banned. It's defined quite clearly. 2 quick transfers of the same player back-to-back within 16 weeks.
Like a quick stopover.
Exactly. Passing through an intermediary club specifically to get around rules or, defraud someone. The rules even presume it's a bridge transfer if you see 2 moves in 16 weeks, unless proven otherwise. Clubs and the player can get sanctioned.
Right, closing loopholes.
Oh.
Okay, so that's movement sorted. But what about when contracts end early, when things break down?
Big section on this. Article 14 covers termination with just cause. Basically, if there's a really good reason, a just cause, either the player or the club can end the contract without facing penalties like compensation or bans.
That counts as just cause.
Well, Article 14 mentions abusive conduct, like if one side is deliberately trying to force the other to terminate or change the deal, that can be grounds.
Okay, protection against pressure tactics. And what about the most common reason? Money.
Yep, Article 14 bis, very important for players. Just cause for outstanding salaries. If a club unlawfully fails to pay at least 2 months' salary,
Fair month.
right, 2 full monthly salaries, or the equivalent if they're paid differently, if they miss that and the player has given them written notice, a formal warning.
A deadline.
Yes, a deadline of at least 15 days to pay up. If the club still doesn't pay after that warning and deadline, then the player has just cause to terminate.
So it's not instant. Player has to warn them first, give them a chance.
Correct. It's a required step. Protects both sides in a way.
Okay. Then there's Article 15, sporting just cause. That sounds different. Not about money.
No, this one's about playing time. It applies to what they call an established professional who has played in less than 10% of the club's official matches in a season.
Less than 10%, so barely featured.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
In that situation, they might be able to terminate for sporting just cause, but it's not automatic. The rules say they look at the specific circumstances case by case.
Okay. And what's the outcome if they can terminate for sporting just cause?
The big difference is, while the player might still owe compensation to the club, depending on the situation, the player themselves does not face sporting sanctions, like a playing ban.
Ah, so they avoid a ban, but might still cost them money.
Potentially, yeah. And critically, they can only use this reason within 15 days after the last official match of the season.
Right. Stops players trying to use it mid-season just because they're not happy. And Article 16 generally stops unilateral termination during the season anyway, doesn't it?
Yeah, reinforces that idea of stability during the competition period.
Okay, so
Yeah.
what happens when someone does terminate without just cause? This is where the real penalties are, right? Article 17.
Absolutely. This is where it gets serious. The party who breaks the contract without a valid reason always has to pay compensation. Always.
And figuring out how much compensation, that seems tricky.
Article 17 gives the guidelines. It considers the law of the country, the specifics of sport, objective things like how much money was left on the old contract, any money they're getting in a new contract, how long was left on the old deal, up to 5 years counts, any fees the old club spent.
Lots of factors. Does that protected period come into play here too?
Yes. That's the first 3 years of a contract if the player signed before turning 28, or the first 2 years if they signed age 28 or older. Breaching during that period often leads to harsher consequences, including sporting sanctions.
Okay. And the compensation calculation itself, Article 17 has specifics for what a player gets.
It does. If the player terminates without just cause but hasn't found a new club yet, compensation is usually the remaining value of the old contract. If they have signed a new deal, it's called mitigated compensation. Basically, the value left on the old contract minus what they'll earn from the new one over the same period.
So the new salary reduces the amount owed by the old club. Makes sense.
Hmm.
But wasn't there something extra if the player left because the club hadn't paid them?
Good point, yes. If the player terminated with just cause because of those overdue payments under Article 14 bis, the compensation they're owed by the club is that mitigated compensation plus an additional compensation.
Extra penalty for not paying. How much?
It's set at an amount equal to 3 months' salary, minimum. But it can be increased up to 6 months' salary if the circumstances were particularly bad. So, yeah, failing to pay gets expensive.
Definitely an incentive to pay on time. Now, here's a bit I always find interesting. If a player breaches their contract without just cause, who pays the compensation?
This is huge. Article 17 is very clear. Both the player and the club they sign for next are jointly and severally liable for paying the compensation to the old club.
Jointly and severally, meaning the old club can chase either the player or the new club for the whole amount.
Exactly. It puts massive risk on the new club if they sign someone who's just walked out on a contract, especially if it was in that protected period.
It's a major deterrent against poaching players or encouraging them to break contracts. And doesn't Article 17 also assume the new club was involved?
It does. There's a presumption that if a club signs a player right after they've terminated without just cause, that new club induced the breach. The burden is then on the new club to prove they weren't involved in the player's decision. Sanctions can also hit any third party, like an agent, who induced a breach.
Wow. Okay, so signing a player in that situation is risky business. Beyond money, you mentioned sporting sanctions if the breach is in the protected period.
Yes. Both sides face bans. The player gets a playing ban, 4 months normally, 6 if it's an aggravated case.
4 to 6 months out of the game.
And the club that signs them. They get hit with a ban on registering any new players, domestic or international, for 2 full consecutive registration periods.
2 whole transfer windows, unable to sign anyone. That could cripple a team.
It's designed to be incredibly severe. A very strong message about respecting contracts, especially early on.
Okay, this brings us nicely to a really critical area. Protecting vulnerable players. Minors and female players. FIFA's put a lot more focus here recently. Article 19 on minors. The basic rule is pretty strict, isn't it?
Extremely strict. The starting point in Article 19 is simple. International transfers are only allowed if the player is 18 or older. Period.
18. That's the line. But we see younger players moving internationally, so there must be exceptions. And this is where it gets really detailed, right?
Very detailed, yeah. Article 19, paragraph 2 lists 5 specific exceptions. These are the only ways a minor can move internationally. First, if the player's parents move to the new country for reasons unrelated to football, the family move comes first.
Okay, non-football reasons.
Second, if the transfer is within the EU or the EEA and the player is between 16 and 18. This is common, but the club has major obligations. Guarantee football training and proper schooling or vocational training, ensure top living standards, provide accommodation or a host family, appoint a mentor.
Wow, lots of safeguards there for the 16, 18-year-olds in Europe.
Definitely focused on welfare. Third exception, border transfers. Player lives within 50 kilometers of a border. The new club is also within 50 kilometers in the next country. Max 100 kilometers apart total. Player has to keep living at home, and both associations must agree.
Right, for kids living right on a border.
Fourth, humanitarian reasons. Like if the player had to flee their country without parents, maybe as a refugee, and needs state protection.
Okay.
And fifth, academic exchange. A student moving temporarily for study registers with a purely amateur club for max 1 year. That club can't have any pro links.
So very specific circumstances. And most of these need FIFA approval.
Yes, most international minor transfers have to be submitted to FIFA's Football Tribunal, the player's status chamber, to check if an exception genuinely applies. There is a simpler limited minor exemption, or LME, for amateurs moving to amateur clubs, but the association still needs to verify things.
So even amateur moves are checked. And clubs have a general duty of care, too.
Absolutely. Article 19, paragraph 8 spells it out. Protect minors from abuse, ensure education. Then there's Article 19er on trials for minors, limits on duration, age minimums, usually 16, 15 in Europe, parent permission needed, welfare standards, club contact point. A minor can only have 2 trials a year max.
Seems quite comprehensive, trying to protect young players. Okay, shifting now to another vital area. Article 18, Quater. Special provisions relating to female players. This was a landmark addition, wasn't it?
Huge. A massive step for women's football. Paragraph 1 is the core. A contract can't be invalidated or terminated just because a player gets pregnant or takes maternity leave.
And if a club tries to terminate for those reasons.
Serious consequences. Paragraph 2 says it's automatically termination without just cause. The compensation owed to the player is higher than normal too. The residual value of her contract plus an additional 6 months' salary.
6 months extra pay on top. That sends a strong message.
It really does. And the sporting sanction for the club is also tough. A ban on registering new female players for 2 whole registration periods. Plus, there's a crucial presumption.
What's that?
If a club terminates a female player's contract while she's pregnant or on maternity leave, FIFA presumes it was because of the pregnancy or maternity, unless the club proves otherwise with convincing evidence.
So the burden of proof is on the club. What about rights during pregnancy and after returning?
Paragraph 4 covers this well. During pregnancy, the player has the right to keep playing or training if it's medically safe, or do other duties. She decides when her maternity leave starts, minimum 14 weeks paid leave, at least 2/3 salary, potentially more based on local laws or agreements,
Okay.
and after leave. Right to return, be reintegrated, get full pay, and the club should provide facilities for breastfeeding if needed. Clubs can also be sanctioned if they try to pressure a player about when she takes her leave.
Very clear protections. Okay, let's switch tracks to the money side of things. Training compensation and solidarity. Article 20. Training compensation. What's that about?
Right. Training compensation is designed to reward clubs that developed a player young. It's payable when a player signs their first pro contract and then on subsequent transfers up until the end of the year they turn 23.
So money flows back to the clubs that train them from age 12 up to 21, basically.
Exactly. 12 to 21 is the training period it covers. The amount is based on standard training costs set by FIFA, depending on the category of the clubs involved.
Rewarding youth development. Makes sense.
But here's a really interesting point from Annex 4. These training compensation rules do not apply to transfers involving female players.
Really? No training comp for developing female players?
Currently, no. And Annex 6 also states they don't apply to futsal players either.
Huh. Any idea why?
The rules don't explicitly say why, but it likely reflects the different developmental stages and financial structures currently in women's football and futsal compared to the established men's pro game. It's a significant difference, though. There are also other exceptions, like no training comp if the old club terminated without just cause, or if the player moves to a low-category club.
Okay, so training comp is linked to training costs, certain age range, but not for women's or futsal transfers.
Yeah.
What about the solidarity mechanism, Article 21?
Solidarity is different. It kicks in when a pro player is transferred for a fee before their contract runs out. When that happens, 5% of the total transfer fee.
5% of the fee itself.
Yes, 5% of the fee, excluding any training comp, is set aside by the new club. And that 5% is then distributed to all the clubs that train the player between the ages of 12 and 23. Annex 5 gives the breakdown, a small percentage for each year of training.
So training comp is based on calculated costs. Solidarity is a direct slice of the transfer pie paid by the buying club.
That's the main difference, yeah. And again, similar to training comp, Annex 6 says the solidarity mechanism doesn't apply to futsal transfers.
Futsal misses out on both.
Ah.
Okay, we've covered movement, contracts, protections, money flows. But what about enforcement? What happens if someone breaks the rules or doesn't pay what they owe?
That's where FIFA steps in, primarily through its football tribunal, set up in Article 23. FIFA's jurisdiction, outlined in Article 22, mainly covers international disputes, contract stability issues between different countries, employment problems, arguments over training comp or solidarity between clubs and different associations. Those all go to the tribunal.
So the tribunal handles the cross-border stuff. What teeth does it have? What if a club loses a case and just refuses to pay?
There are significant sanctions. Article 24 deals with failure to comply with decisions. If a club doesn't pay up money ordered by the tribunal, they can face a ban on registering new players.
How long a ban?
It can be up to 3 entire consecutive registration periods.
3 windows again. That's even tougher than the 2 for breaching a contract in the protected period.
It is. Ignoring rulings and debts is taken very seriously. Players and coaches can also get restrictions on playing or coaching up to 6 months if they fail to pay amounts they owe. But for these payment default sanctions, Article 12 by says the creditor has to formally warn the debtor first, give them at least 10 days notice to pay.
Another warning step needed first. And if a club gets hit with a registration ban, say mid-window.
Crucially, Article 24, paragraph 7 says the ban takes effect immediately when FIFA notifies them. If that happens while a window is open, the rest of that open window counts as the first registration period of the ban.
Ouch. No quick signings before the shutters come down.
None. And Article 25 is interesting too. It talks about sporting successors. If a club sort of disappears but a new club pops up, that's basically the same place, name, colors, players, etc. That new club can inherit the debts and even the sanctions of the old one.
Stops clubs dodging obligations by just changing their name slightly.
Exactly. Prevents that kind of avoidance.
We have covered a lot of ground here. Definitions, moving players, contract issues, penalties, protections, money, enforcement. It's a complex web. Any other interesting bits tucked away in the annexes?
Well, Annex 2 specifically deals with coaches. A lot of the same principles about contracts, termination, overdue pay, and sanctions apply to them too.
Okay, coaches have similar protections.
And Annex 1 is fundamental for international football, releasing players to national teams. Men's, women's, futsal. Clubs have to release their players for official international windows and tournaments.
Mandatory release. That's why you see clubs losing key players during international breaks.
Yep. The Annex details the different structures for men's, women's, futsal windows. Clubs don't get paid for it, but the National Association covers travel, and the club is responsible for insurance. And there's usually a rule that players can't play for their club for about 5 days after their release period ends.
Gives them a bit of recovery, stops clubs rushing them back immediately.
Exactly. Prioritizes the international game and player welfare there. Oh, and finally, Annex 7 has those temporary rules related to the situation in Ukraine and Russia, allowing players and coaches linked to clubs there to suspend contracts, currently until June 30th, 2024, and providing some exceptions on registration limits and training comp to help them find new clubs.
A specific response to a difficult, real-world situation.
Indeed. Necessary flexibility there.
Wow. Okay, so going through this FIFA rulebook really does pull back the curtain, doesn't it? We unpack the definitions, the strict timelines for transfers, the ITC, TMS, how contracts can end, the serious consequences like bans and compensation, especially that joint liability.
And those crucial protections for minors, the detailed rights for female players regarding pregnancy and maternity.
Right, plus the money trails, training compensation, solidarity trying to reward development, and then how FIFA actually enforces all this through the tribunal and sanctions.
You definitely now have a much better grasp of the hidden structure behind those transfer headlines and player moves you see all the time. It's the system, complex as it is, that tries to govern the global football market.
It really makes you think, though, given how incredibly detailed and, frankly, prescriptive these rules are, governing movement protection, club duties, how does this level of intense regulation actually shape the power balance between clubs and players? Does it truly level the field? Or maybe, does the sheer complexity itself create unintended loopholes or advantages for those who know how to navigate it best?
That is a fascinating question. The rules aim for order and fairness, but navigating them effectively is definitely a skill. Does complexity inherently favor the bigger, better resourced clubs or agents? It's something to ponder next time you hear about a multi-million-pound signing being announced.
Definitely food for thought. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into FIFA's transfer regulations. Hope you feel a bit more informed about the machinery behind the beautiful game. Until next time.